You know, I was reading today that CNN is reporting that ICE is now raiding agricultural communities in California, which will really damage the economy of California. And California subsidizes most of the red states in this country. And so those people that voted for Donald Trump are going to be affected by what ICE is doing. The other thing that
I think why don't people know that already? I mean, it's so obvious.
It's so obvious, but this is about economics as well. And I'll also say this, you know, I think Trump is not doing this just for optics. I think that this is a test case so that he can dismantle some of our institutions. I think it's a power grab. I think he is trying to use the might of the military to suppress people's rights. I think that is very clear. When you use the military against your own citizens, that is a sign of fact.
It began like any other morning on The View, warm smiles, steaming coffee, and the usual swirl of hot takes drifting through the air. But the conversation took a sharp turn. The spotlight wasn't on Hollywood glamour or beachside sunsets. It was on Los Angeles unraveling. Chaos gripped the streets. Riots igniting, Molotov cocktails slicing through the night, squad cars ablaze like pyres of unrest. And as America watched in disbelief, many wondered, how would The View respond? Would they denounce the violence? Take a stand? Not even close.
I was trying to kind of get into the head of Donald Trump on what he's doing around this, and I think most of this is driven by politics. What I think he's doing is he is baiting liberals and liberal governors like Gavin Newsom into taking the bait and adopting rhetoric that he thinks is going to be divisive and damaging ahead of the midterm. So what he wants to happen is he wants Newsom and Democrats to start chanting things like defund ICE, defund the police, because we know that hurt Kamala Harris. We know it hurt Tim Walz. They had to run away from those previous positions, and he's trying to create that sort of standoff right now. But here's the problem. Most Americans oppose rioting. That's just across the board. They may generally be like, if there's violence, if police officers are getting hurt, but they don't like it.
They twisted it, defended it, even found a way to justify it. These are the same voices who mourned endlessly over the Capitol riot on January 6, calling it the darkest day in American history, a deep blow to democracy, a desecration of all things sacred. Their outrage then was relentless, raw, and loud. But now that the flames are burning in Los Angeles and the chaos aligns with their politics, suddenly it's not a riot, it's a protest. The destruction is understandable. Law-breaking. Barely worth a mention, no tears, no trembling voices. Just quiet nods and knowing smirks. The double standard doesn't just reek of bias, it insults the intelligence of anyone paying attention.
I just want to say, you know, construction places, you're going to have a harder time finding people who are going to be able to come and do your house. Who are they going to get to pick all the fruit and the vegetables? Because Americans don't want to do it. We know that. The farmers are saying the Americans don't want to do this.
And the tariffs on top of that is going to make everything so expensive.
That too, but getting
it's
people,
a mess.
Food is going to be sitting and rotting because there's no one to grab it.
They say they stand for justice, but somehow their definition seems to shift depending on who's holding the torch and why it's burning. When the cause fits the narrative, silence becomes virtue and destruction is recast as courage. Funny how that works. Oh, and before we dive deeper, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us shine a light on the stories others would rather keep in the dark. Now, let's get back to it.
Can you tell me which one is the riot in Los Angeles and which is the celebration for the Eagles?
Yeah. Philadelphia loves to burn itself down. Also bad.
But was the National Guard sent in when
well, that's your
was
point. The
burning?
National Guard was not, well, that's the point.
Yeah. Where's the National Guard?
In part, yeah. So, well, the difference is there's an agenda.
This wasn't just an awkward moment or a poorly framed segment. It was a crystal clear window into just how out of touch The View has become with everyday reality. And this was only the beginning. Enter Sunny Hostin. Arms tightly crossed, expression steely, voice shaking, not with fear, but with that signature brand of self-righteous fury. She didn't merely comment on the unrest, she twisted it into a wild narrative drenched in political paranoia. According to her, The chaos in California wasn't organic, it was orchestrated. She claimed Donald Trump was using the moment to seize power, to erode democratic institutions, to experiment with deploying military force on American streets.
Where I put a little bit of onus on Governor Newsom, show that you have the police force to stop the unrest and that it is completely unnecessary to have the National Guard there, to have U.S. troops there, because you can't deny the imagery that you're seeing. There are cars being lit on fire, there are police officers being attacked, there are guardsmen being attacked.
Though?
So to be honest, I don't really care if you're hurting police officers, if you're damaging property, that you should get your day in
was
court
happening like
for.
that until they sent
But this is where it's on the governor to say, let's make this the biggest peaceful protest in history, but the second it gets violent, the governor needs to crack down.
To hear her tell it, deploying the National Guard to protect lives and uphold federal law was somehow the equivalent of declaring martial law in a totalitarian regime. In her world, sending in officers to stop violent riots wasn't law enforcement, it was tyranny. An all-out assault on democracy itself. But here's what she conveniently left out: the raw, unfiltered reality. The footage from Los Angeles didn't show peaceful marches, they showed chaos. Rioters launching explosives, smashing storefronts, ambushing officers, and torching entire city blocks like scenes out of a war zone. That's not protest. That's destruction.
Sort of, it's the largest state and it has a GDP that's larger than many countries. And so I think we have to look at what's happening from a bird's eye perspective and look at the why. Trump is militarizing that state as a test run, to make sure that he can do it in places like New York, that he can do it in other sanctuary cities. And so there is a plan to this in my view. And I really think that there's no question that the LAPD, that has 9,000 police officers, could have handled this quite well.
Can I just say, look, I'm not trying to sound petty or superficial here, but with sunny facts simply don't stand a chance. None of it mattered. Not the footage, not the fires, not the shattered glass, or terrified business owners. In her world, if Trump so much as breathes near a crisis, it's automatically labeled evil. No nuance, no debate. Just blind condemnation. This is what happens when ideology slowly eats away at critical thinking. When someone becomes so consumed by political hatred, they lose the ability to process reality. And that level of disconnect? It's not just cringeworthy, it's dangerous. Because when you start justifying violence simply because it's coming from your side of the aisle, you're not stopping it. You're fueling it. You're giving it a green light. And remember, we're not even at the peak of this segment yet. The wildest moment? Still to come. That's when Alyssa finally jumped in. While the others danced around the chaos like it was a sensitive topic at brunch, she cut through the noise and dropped a truth bomb. Her words were sharp, clear, and impossible to ignore. Trump isn't starting the fire, he's exposing the game.
I don't want to be superficial, but Gavin Newsom brings me back to really handsome presidents like JFK and Obama. And wouldn't it be nice to have an articulate, gorgeous president like that?
Alyssa broke it down with surgical precision. She explained how Trump wasn't just watching the chaos unfold, he was setting a political trap. A baited hook, dangling just low enough for Democrats like Gavin Newsom to bite. And they did. Loudly. Embracing extreme slogans like defund ICE and abolish the police, not because they made sense, but because they felt politically charged. They had already derailed Kamala Harris. They helped sink Tim Walz. The moment Democrats start chanting that rhetoric again, voters don't just hesitate, they bolt. Alyssa laid it out clearly. Most Americans, regardless of party, despise rioting. They don't want to see cops under siege, neighborhoods in flames, or stores turned into war zones. You can empathize with a cause, but the second it turns violent, public support disappears like smoke. And here's where it gets even more twisted. Newsom knew all of this. He could have intervened, called for calm, reined it in. But he didn't. Alyssa claimed he let the fires rage because he believed that chaos could be leveraged to pressure the federal government into easing up on immigration enforcement. Using chaos to block deportations isn't just bad policy, it's a reckless power play. one that gambles with people's lives, property, and public trust. And the more you dig, the darker it gets. Alyssa didn't stop at calling out Newsom's strategy. She pulled back the curtain on the entire political playbook, and what she revealed was brutal. According to her, this isn't about compassion. It's not about human rights or fairness or any noble cause. It's about raw, calculated power. She argued that Democrats aren't truly interested in securing the border or enforcing immigration laws. Their real objective: mass amnesty. Because if you legalize tens of millions of undocumented immigrants, you don't just reshape the system, you build a new, loyal voting bloc. One that can tip the scales for decades. Flood the system, offer promises of benefits, and lock in long-term political control. That's the strategy. And Alyssa brought receipts. She reminded the panel how Democrats in Congress once refused to honor the family of Laken Riley, the young woman tragically murdered by an illegal immigrant, or the time they used taxpayer funds to intervene in El Salvador to stop the deportation of an MS-13 gang member. Those weren't isolated missteps. They were glimpses into a broader pattern. Now in Los Angeles, we're watching it in real time. Protesters brazenly attacking ICE agents while Democratic leaders look the other way. According to Alyssa, this isn't about civil rights. It's about preserving a system of lawlessness that serves their political ends. Her message? Clear, unapologetic, and hard to ignore. Trump didn't create the chaos. We need to be clear on that. What he did was force Democrats to reveal their hand. And what that exposure uncovered? It wasn't a vision of unity, progress, or public safety. It was something far more unsettling. A glimpse into a country slipping into politically fueled madness. A version of America that most people, regardless of party, don't recognize and definitely don't want to live in. And just when you thought the conversation couldn't spiral further, Whoopi Goldberg jumped in with a take so outlandish it left the room stunned. With a straight face, she actually compared the violent riots erupting in Los Angeles to a sports celebration. You heard that right, burning vehicles, fireworks aimed at law enforcement, and federal agents under siege. And according to Whoopi, it was all just like Philly fans celebrating a Super Bowl win. She even asked, "Can you even tell the difference?" As if drunk fans flipping a car in the name of victory somehow mirrors coordinated mobs lobbing Molotov cocktails to sabotage deportations. The panel nodded along, treating it like some bold insight, but it wasn't. Not even close. Here's the reality. Sure, fans can get rowdy after a big game. But that's not the same as trying to dismantle federal law enforcement with explosives and street warfare. That's not celebration, that's intimidation. That's not civil disobedience, it's organized political violence. It's not harmless chaos. It's domestic terrorism, plain and simple. And for Whoopi to wave it off as some harmless misunderstanding? That's dangerous. That kind of denial from high-profile voices doesn't de-escalate the violence, it fuels it. When celebrities laugh it off or shift the blame, they're sending a clear message to law-abiding citizens: your safety comes second. And just when the smoke should have cleared, Gavin Newsom stepped right back into the fire. After Whoopi's jaw-dropping comparison, Alyssa returned to the discussion, this time putting Newsom squarely under the spotlight. She pointed to the footage that everyone had already seen with their own eyes. Cars engulfed in flames, officers bloodied, storefronts gutted. There was no spinning this, no editing, no rebranding. It was raw, unfiltered reality playing out in real time. Streets in turmoil, neighborhoods engulfed in flames, and riot squads deployed like it was a war zone. And what did Governor Gavin Newsom do? He stepped in front of the cameras, adjusted his tie, and called it a peaceful protest. Peaceful, while the skyline glowed orange and sirens echoed through the night. Alyssa wasn't buying the illusion. She called it exactly what it was: a failure of leadership, broadcast for the nation to see. She said this was the moment for Newsom to rise to the challenge, to prove California could stand on its own without pleading for the National Guard or waiting for federal backup. But instead of leading, Newsom played pretend, as if the shattered storefronts, burning vehicles, and terrified residents were all part of some, mostly peaceful civic expression. Alyssa didn't hold back. She slammed him for turning California into what she described as a lawless free-for-all. "This is what happens," she said, "when leadership collapses. And it's hard to argue otherwise." Newsom's political brand, once polished and ambitious, is now unraveling live on camera. Under his watch, Californians have been taxed to the brink, illegal immigration has surged, and every radical policy on the progressive wish list has been fast-tracked into law. And now? The state is literally burning, and he's pretending it's all fine. But while Los Angeles smoldered, the anxiety spread. Other sanctuary cities, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, started to sweat. The Trump administration wasn't bluffing anymore. It was moving fast and decisively. Then Sunny Hostin tried to zoom out, claiming to offer a bird's-eye view of the situation. But instead of clarity, she leaned into fear. According to her, California wasn't the endpoint, it was just the warm-up. She warned that Trump was testing the waters for a nationwide crackdown, complete with military-style immigration enforcement, and sanctuary cities were next on the list. She wasn't wrong. Federal agents began deploying into neighborhoods once thought untouchable. And the mayors? They panicked. Because this time, it was real. There was no more hiding behind rhetoric. But perhaps the most revealing moment came when Sunny admitted something shocking. The LAPD, with over 9,000 officers, could have controlled the chaos without any help. They had the numbers, they had the training, but they weren't used. Why? Because enforcing the law might look bad. Because cracking down on what politicians wanted to call peaceful protests came with a political price. So instead, they let it all unfold. They let small businesses burn, let icy agents take the heat, and let ordinary citizens fend for themselves. Also, leaders could preserve the narrative. Nothing was wrong, or at least, that's what they wanted you to believe. They stood behind podiums and in front of cameras, gaslighting the public into thinking everything was under control. But deep down, they knew the truth. Their soft on crime, open border policies had finally come back to haunt them. The chaos wasn't some unforeseen tragedy. It was the inevitable outcome of years spent ignoring the rule of law. And for thousands of people living in so-called sanctuary cities, the message was now unmistakably clear: cooperate with ICE, or watch the kind of destruction you saw in Los Angeles march right up to your doorstep. But this wasn't just a warning to city officials. This was a wake-up call to undocumented immigrants who had been lulled into a false sense of security by politicians promising protection. The narrator in a viral video didn't mince words. "This is your last chance. Self-deport now." Trump's administration wasn't playing around anymore. The gloves were off. A line had been drawn in the sand, and those who had ignored deportation orders or assumed that having a child born on U.S. soil would grant them immunity were suddenly realizing those assumptions were dead wrong. This was the final offer: leave peacefully, maybe even with financial assistance and a plane ticket home. But stay and resist. You'd be removed, forcibly, publicly, and permanently. But this wasn't just about enforcing immigration policy. This was about cleaning up a mess that had been festering for years. One that the Biden administration had only made worse with its lack of enforcement and political cowardice. Years of leniency had bred complacency. Sanctuary cities weren't safe havens, they were powder kegs. And the riots in LA didn't just light the fuse, they blew the lid off the entire system. For the first time in a long time, consequences were no longer theoretical. They were visible, tangible, loud, and terrifying. The price of ignoring federal law was no longer hidden behind bureaucratic language or legal loopholes. It was playing out in the streets in flames, blood, and broken glass. And just when you thought the national conversation couldn't sink any lower, The View found a way to do the impossible. They turned tragedy into theater, and not even the serious kind. With the fires still burning in Los Angeles, cops laid up in hospitals, and small businesses reduced to ash. Joy Behar took a moment, not to address the devastation, not to ask for accountability, but to fawn over Gavin Newsom's looks. Yes, really. She didn't stop there. She compared him to JFK and Obama, like a fangirl reminiscing about her high school crush. She even sighed that it would be so nice to have a gorgeous, articulate president again, as if political leadership is a fashion contest and we're all just voting for prom king. Forget California's collapsing economy. Forget the homelessness crisis swallowing entire blocks. Forget the soaring taxes, the failed high-speed rail, the drug-ridden streets, and the fact that the state can barely keep the lights on. None of that matters, apparently, if the guy has slicked back hair and a polished smile. This wasn't just cringe, it was insulting. Not just to the millions of Americans watching, but especially to women. Because what Joy did on live television wasn't political commentary. It was juvenile fangirling. And it fed directly into every tired, outdated stereotype that says women vote with their hearts instead of their heads. In that moment, The View wasn't just tone-deaf, it was unserious, out of touch, a parody of itself. And sadly, it showed us why so many Americans have stopped taking it, or its panelists, seriously.